Good afternoon. Let me repeat. Good afternoon to all of you. I am Omar Boum. I am professor of anthropology, history, and Near Eastern languages and cultures at UCLA. I also hold the Maurice Amado Chair in Sephardic Studies. On behalf of the UCLA Alan D. Levy Center for Jewish Studies, I would like to welcome you all to the Maurice Amado program in Sephardic Studies. Special thanks to the center staff, especially Viv, Reina, David, and Chelsea, for their outstanding support and service to the center and to this program. Today our speaker is Dr. Helen Jauhara Pinier from Fordham University. She's a historian and chef with expertise in Sephardic culinary history. It's really hard for me to introduce our today's speaker fasting this month, but it's great. I'll be looking forward to the food later after the end of the day. Dr. Piniers graduated from the University of Tours in France with a PhD in medieval history and the history of food. Dr. Piniers' work is to recreate ancient Jewish recipes using sources from the Inquisition, Tribunal, and medieval Arabic. She has collaborated with renowned chefs like Michael Solomonov and hosted an online cooking series for the American Sephardic Federation. Her publications include Sephardic Cooking, the history recipes of the Jews of Spain and the diasporas from the 13th century to today, 2021, was published in 2021, which won the Gourmand World Cookbook Award for Best Jewish Cuisine Book. Jews, Food, and Spain, this is the book I actually read, the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook, and the Sephardic Culinary Heritage in 2022, a scholarly study on Jewish and conversos food culture in Spain, and matzah and flour recipes from the history of the Sephardic Jews in 2024, which reconstruct historical Jewish recipes from Spain, Portugal, Mexico, Morocco, and beyond. According to Dr. Pinier's book, or what this book is mostly, one of the things that this book discusses is the topic of today's, which is the topic of today's discussion. Jewish food in medieval Iberia functioned as a cultural marker and has endured in Sephardic communities. She examines the oldest surviving Iberian cookbook, Kitab al-Tabikh or Kitab al-Tabkh, and concludes that it is an unidentified author was probably Jewish based on ingredient selections and dietary regulations. The inclusion of explicitly Jewish recipes, the religious and social dynamics of medieval Iberia, and the effects of 15th century culinary homogeneity, which marginalizes Jewish and Muslim influences, are all highlighted in this important research. She also investigates symbolic food like eggplant and dafina, and uses literature to analyze how women have contributed to the preservation of Jewish culinary traditions. The work of Dr. Piniers makes a substantial contribution to the conversation about the lasting legacy of Jewish culinary traditions and Iberian culinary multiculturalism. Dr. Piniers' research reveals the stories hidden in every dish from medieval cookbooks to the modern adaptations, expanding our knowledge of food and the link between heritage, memory, and history. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Piniers to give the talk, and then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I am really delighted to be able to talk here at UCLA on the topic I really love to talk about, not only about this one, but about all the topic related to Jewish history and Sephardic history. And first of all, I would like to thank so UCLA University, and also the Lev Center for Sephardic Studies, Reina and Chelsea and Professor Omar Boom for having me here. Today we are going to dwell into a topic I really love because it's part of my research that I started when I was a PhD candidate. So we are going to talk about the Sephardic culinary heritage of the Jews of Spain according to the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook. So when I started my PhD, I spent 2 years of my 6th-year PhD working only on this source, the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook. The goal here is always 2 questions. So this is how we have to do to understand the things. So we are going to ask to ourselves concerning the relationship between Jewish culinary traditions and the broader socio-political landscape of the medieval Spain. We are gonna talk about longevity, survival, transmission, and adaptation that are in fact the keywords to understand Sephardic Jewish history through food. This book is the book I wrote after when I finished my PhD. And Jewish food in Spain is really focused. It's a book of history which is very focused on the first source that mentions explicitly Jewish recipes in the world. This book, the structure of this book, mirror history. So that's why there are 3 different chapters that follow the chronological events according to Jewish history in general. So what is the starting point? So we are going to talk about the Jews of Spain. We are going to talk about the Sephardim. So maybe you're going to ask, well, what's the difference? So why don't we say the Sephardim to refer to the Jews of Spain? This is only question of the period. And obviously, as our topic is the culinary heritage, the first source that we are going to talk about is obviously the cookbook. So to understand better, as we're going to talk about the evolution and the existence of a Sephardic Jewish cuisine, obviously we need a starting point. So the starting point have to be considered in the very special context. So the historical context of Spain before 711. This is very important, in fact, as we have to understand since when the Jews are in Spain. So since we know about this, so we are able to talk about the evolution of the cuisine and the food practices of the Jews. So before 711, Jews were in Spain. They were in Spain since the 1st century. This is very important. So at that time, between the 1st and 2nd century, this is in fact when the second Jewish diaspora settled in Spain. At that time, there were also different communities. So there were the Romans, who were Catholics. There were obviously Jewish people. There were also Visigoths. The Visigoths were a German tribe. And also small communities of the Byzantines. At that time, the Muslims did not arrive yet. We have to wait 711 to understand, to know that now the Muslims are going to rule the territory. So obviously, everybody was living at that time in the same territory. So obviously, they had to eat as everybody. So the thing that we have to keep in mind is that during that period, nobody found any information concerning the food practices of the Jews in the 8th century. The first evidence of this, like recipes or food practices, only dates back to the 13th century. So this is the book, the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook. This is the source, and the only one and the oldest source we have that contains explicitly Jewish recipe. This book is called the Kitab al-Tabir or Kitab al-Tabr. That means, in fact, the cookbook in English. This cookbook is anonymous. We do not know the name of the person who wrote this book. It has been found in, and has been written as well, in Andalusia, so in the south of Spain, in the 13th century. And it is a unique witness to complex realities. The second cookbook we should also talk a bit about is this one, the Fudalat al-Hiwan. It's in fact the second Andalusian cookbook. It has been written by Ibn Razim al-Tujibi in the 13th century in Spain. The difference is that this cookbook has been written a few decades after the Kitab al-Tabir, so the first cookbook. This is also very different because we know the author, and we know that this author was Muslim. The third cookbook we have that, and which has been written almost during the same period, even if a bit later, is called the Saint-Sauvy. So this one is written in Catalan, so nothing to do with the first two ones, and it is also anonymous, and it has been written as it has been written in Catalan, so it has been found in the northern eastern Spain. This cookbook has absolutely nothing to do with the first two ones written in Arabic. Absolutely nothing to do. So maybe we can ask us different questions. What does the study of the food practices of the Jews in the 13th century, so I'm talking about the practices of the Jews of Spain, because this is how we have to call the Jewish people at that time, reveal about the social and political context of Spain? How does this help to a better understanding of the food heritage of today's Spain? And why is it relevant to discuss Sephardic cuisine today? So, in fact, those three questions are very important. I mean, we have to understand the very complex historical situation and very complex religious situation to understand what is Sephardic cuisine today and why the Sephardim are actually making those kinds of dishes and have those different food practices. So in the first time, obviously, we're going to focus this lecture on this unique witness, the Kitab al-Tabir, that reflects the complex realities. So this has been the starting point of my research. This cookbook contains, it's a very special cookbook. It's not a cookbook in the way we understand the cookbooks nowadays. So with a list of ingredients and a very detailed process with a very special amount. This has absolutely nothing to do. This one is very special. It's a very special one in the way that obviously he does not contain list of ingredients, but also because it has a lot of references concerning dietary practices and a lot of information concerning medicine. So the author was very knowledgeable and he knew very well about medicine and dietary practices. So this cookbook contains 462 recipes of dishes. There are almost less than 100 other kinds of recipes that deal with the making of soap and perfumes and other things like this. But 462 only for dishes. And this is the only one, the oldest, not the only one, but the oldest one that contains 6 explicitly Jewish recipes. I mean that when I say 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, I mean that in the title of the recipe, the word in Arabic, the word Yehud or Yehudi is mentioned in the title. So this is very, very important. First, why is this very important? It's very important because this means that the author, but also in the context, this revealed that there were recipes that were made by and for Jews in the 13th century. This means that there were recipes that were identified as different than the other recipes contained in the cookbook. So this is so how this looked like. So 462 recipes of dishes and 64 other kinds of recipes. This cookbook is very, very well organized with with chapters that refer to. We have a whole chapter concerning eggplant, for example. Among those recipes, we have 50 vegetarian dishes. This is totally unique if we just consider the other cookbooks written during this same period. This is totally unique. So why having this chapter only using vegetables, in fact? Those are the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes. As one can see, the first one is called a Jewish dish of chicken. So you can see the word in Arabic. So Lun min farouj Yehudi. So this is exactly the translation in English. You have the second one is Jewish dish of chicken. So there is a difference between. So there are really 2 different recipes. In the first one, the chicken is stuffed. So it's a whole chicken and it's stuffed. Nevertheless, in the second one, the chicken is cut, and it uses the use of ingredients are totally different. In the third one, you have the recipe of partridge, so Jewish partridge. That's the same process. I mean, in this third one, the partridge is stuffed, so it's a whole partridge, and there is stuffing inside. And number 4, the fourth one, it's a Jewish dish of partridge, and this time the partridge is cut. And there are also 2 different kinds of recipes. Recipe number 5, a stuffed buried Jewish dish. This recipe is really interesting, not only for the process of making the recipe, but also for the shape, the final result, how the dish looks like at the end. It's like a big cake made with different layers of eggs and meatballs and lamb, and so this is really interesting. And then we're going to ask ourselves if this recipe is still prepared nowadays by the Sephardim. The 6th and last one is a Jewish dish of eggplants stuffed with meat, and this meat is lamb. So this is a recipe that I'm gonna show you how they look like, because obviously I made them. Obviously, and I ate them as well. But so we are going to see how this look like, and we are to question ourselves concerning the transmission of the practices of those recipes. So the food used in the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes in the 13th century Spain. So in 67% you have entrails, like liver, for example, vinegar and rose water. So this is interesting because in fact rose water at that time was not one of the kind of food that were used a lot by the Jews of Spain. It was more some things from the Middle Eastern practices. But this is not surprising because in fact you know that the author was very knowledgeable, and also food move when people move. So this is quite obvious in fact. But the Sephardim of Spain have lost this practice, and this is mainly today Mizrahi and Middle Eastern food practice. In 83% of the Jewish recipes, you have onions, mint, cinnamon, salt, and pine nuts. In all the recipes, 100% you have oil, which is olive oil. You have eggs, and sometimes the recipe calls for 35 eggs in one single recipe. So I don't know if they used to grow hens, I don't know, home, but yes. So Yeah, but on the other side, it's very important because this also reveals the importance of using eggs, and even nowadays in Sephardic food and Sephardic cuisine. Meat, nuts, all kinds of nuts, but mainly almond nuts, walnuts, and pine nuts. And obviously we have cilantro, which is something very important because this cilantro is part of the trio of the three ingredients that defines, and even today, what is Sephardic cuisine. So we have cilantro and we have olive oil, and the third one, no, but it could be. It's garlic. Yes, garlic. So I just wanted to show you how a recipe from the Kitab al-Tabikh look like. This is a Jewish dish of chicken. We're not going to talk a lot about this. Just wanted to show you that, we can see that it contains 6 eggs here. You have fresh oil. When it's fresh oil, it's obviously olive oil. And just to say that, in fact, as you can see, the recipe is not very well written in Arabic, so it's very easy to understand. At the last time, just also what is maybe also important to talk about is the way the recipes are presented. I mean, it's always the first thing that the person who is going to make the recipe has to do is to clean the chicken or to clean the meat. So this is interesting because there are different ways of thinking what does clean the meat means. So I'm going to talk about this after, but this is also important. So always starting with the meat. And at the end, always to make the dish very beautiful. This is very important. Those are how they look like when once they're done. So here the whole chicken when it's cut. Here the same with the partridge. Here you have when the partridge is cut. Just want to catch your attention about this one because in this recipe, what is very important is the way that the author or the cook, you can say, present the recipe. At the end, it mentioned that you have to take the eggs and cut them into a half and to make a star. Just as, to make the dish beautiful. But the star is very important. This one is the one I've been talking about just 2 minutes ago. That looks like a cake with different layers of omelets made with eggs, with meatballs and ground meat. It's lamb. And this one is, so there are the eggplants that have been cooked, and we have to take the flesh and to make, like a stuffing, and to use breadcrumbs over and to bake it. This one is also very important. As you can see, there are egg yolks, and the egg yolks, not only the hard-boiled egg cut into a half, but this one, as many others, calls for only egg yolks. This is important thing I wanted to share with you, and it is with Jewish and Muslim food consumption and the cooking practices in the Kitab al-Tabikh. Why is this very important? Because the moment when the Kitab al-Tabikh, so the cookbook, has been written, deal with the presence of the Muslims and the second dynasty of, it's a Berber dynasty that started to rule the country, and they are called the Almohads. And the situation is that the Almohads, so the second Berber dynasty from Morocco, had a very dogmatic vision of Islam. This was very hard, even for the Muslims at that time, that to live in Spain, in this territory, in the 13th century, and even before this. For example, you have Averroes, so Ibn Rushd, who was Muslim, who also he had to fled because he was not able to still living there. Maimonides, who has been living, the Rambam, who has been living at the same period, also had to fled Spain for the same reasons, but he was Jewish. So here we have, concerning the food consumptions mentioned in the Kitab al-Tabir, you have bread. You have a lot of recipes that deal with bread and bread consumption. What is nevertheless most important, because we are actually talking about Jewish food practices according to in the Kitab al-Tabir, is that you have here fatir, what is in fact what refers to unleavened bread. And here you have this, so what could be nowadays the challah, so the braided bread. We are in the 13th century Spain. And in this cookbook, there is a recipe that uses a lot of eggs with dough. And I have been working on this cookbook and also the second one, the Fudadat one, and other cookbooks, and also 11 cookbooks that have been written under Christian domination since the 15th century to the 17th century. 11 cookbooks, so more than 1,000 recipes. So with this one, it could be like 2,000 recipes. I only found this recipe of braided bread in the Kitab al-Tabir that contains explicitly Jewish recipes. So this is very interesting. You have here, so there is the question of wine and honey. You have, so just remind, we are in Spain, so under Muslim domination, the dogmatic one. So obviously consuming wine was not the best thing, in fact, for the people there. So in one of the recipes, nevertheless you have wine, and this recipe is made with chicken and wine. But what is quite funny is that the recipe said that if you are a good Muslim, you really want to use honey instead of wine. In the Kitab al-Tabir, we can think about the presence of meat. Obviously, there is no pork inside. This is totally logical. But what maybe have to be highlighted is that you remember when I talked to you about the Jewish dish of chicken, and cleaning the meat. So there are a lot of recipes in this cookbook that calls for salting the meat prior to use the meat. In the food practices of the Muslims, this is not required. You do not need to salt the meat. And so while mentioning that you really have to salt the meat in those recipes, I mean not only in the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, I say this because it is mentioned in almost all the recipes of the Kitab al-Tabir. All the recipes calls for clean the meat and salt the meat. This is totally Jewish practice. You have also recipes that say that, so you have to clean the meat, salt the meat, and then you want to remove the tendon of the meat. Muslims' food practices do not call for removing the tendon of the meat, but Jewish food practices, yes. The use of olive oil is mentioned everywhere, and we have this chapter on eggplant, and I'm going to talk about you a bit after why eggplant is so important. So maybe we can ask ourselves, okay, we have 6 explicitly Jewish recipes in this cookbook. We do not know the author. Nevertheless, we know that the author obviously knows very well concerning the food practices of the Jews and the dietary practices of the Jews, because it really respects the kashrut, so the dietary laws of the mentioned in the Torah. So, are there more than 6 explicitly Jewish recipes in this cookbook? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. But the word Yehud or Yehudi is never mentioned in the title. So how was I able to understand that there were those recipes were Jewish? Well, thanks to the process. Thanks to the process. For example, you have a recipe that is called the rabbit dish. Well, we said the rabbit dish in the Kitab al-Tabir. Well, no, okay, there is nothing special about this recipe. Nevertheless, because in fact, if this cookbook has been written by a Muslim author, where there is nothing surprising that this cookbook could mention a dish with rabbit, because Muslims can eat rabbit. But nevertheless, when you read this recipe called the rabbit dish, this recipe does not have any rabbit meat. Any rabbit meat. So, and what is used instead as a substitute, it's eggplant. Why eggplant? Because when you cook an eggplant, so the flesh comes a bit darker, and the density of the flesh makes makes easy the thing to shape as if it was another kind of meat, as if it was meat, but it was not meat at all. And the recipe said that you really want to cook the eggplant and to shape the dish so you can think that it's rabbit, but it's not rabbit. You have the recipe I mentioned before, so the cooked chicken. The cooked chicken is, in fact, is made with wine and nothing else. And you have those recipes called the murakaba and isfenj. So those recipes are a bit different. The murakaba is a recipe very, I'm sure, for those who are Sephardim, and mainly Sephardim from Morocco. You know what is this recipe, but under a different name. This recipe is made with flour and water and sometimes semolina, and it also contains a bit salt, honey, and butter. But the process of making this recipe makes it really and easily you can identify it as what is nowadays moufleta. Moufleta is in fact what the Moroccan Jews made for Mimuna to celebrate the end of Passover. This recipe from the 13th century is 100% exactly the same as the recipe that the Jews of Morocco, even in the diaspora, prepare nowadays to celebrate the end of Passover. So Passover is, like, I'm sure you know what is Passover. So the week, okay. So, and the last one, isfenj, is very special because the isfenj, but called isfenj in the Kitab al-Tabir, are donuts that are nowadays prepared and eaten by all the Jews from Morocco, even in the street. It's a street food mainly, and so by Muslims. But at that time, so according to the Kitab al-Tabir, all the people of Spain in Andalusia were making, so Jews and Muslims were making isfenj. But the difference is that the Jews used to make isfenj for a different reason. And this reason was the celebration of the Jewish feast of Hanukkah. So, but the word Jews is not mentioned. So I'm gonna go a bit faster. So this is what I've got. So just to say here that if we want to understand what is the evolution and the cuisine of the Sephardic Jews, we have to start with the 13th century. But if we do not look forward, we cannot understand and understand the evolution of Sephardic cuisine. We have to to read other kinds of sources, and we have to read what happened, in fact, in the next centuries. The Christian-dominated cookbook. So I told you, like more than 1,000, and the recipes had absolutely nothing to do. So they were written under Christian domination. They have absolutely nothing to do with the recipes of the Kitab al-Tabir. Absolutely nothing to do. They are pork and lard everywhere, from the first plate to the dessert, everywhere. So even if this lecture does not call for the centuries, the 15th centuries onwards, I just wanted to talk very quickly, like 5 minutes, about this. So you have here, when I told you that you have to just to understand and to read other kind of sources, the literary works offers a critical perspective of the food practices of the Jews. So you have different poems, for example, where so this is in the 15th century. So Christians started to rule the country because in 1492, this is the end. 1492 could be maybe, in my point of view, the most important date in all the history of the Iberian Peninsula. So 1492 is the end of the domination of Islam at the very beginning of the year, so the 2nd of January. It is then the edict of expulsion of the Jews. And then it's, so in October 12th, it's the discovery of America. So since then, we have a lot of interesting references concerning the way that the food practices of the Jews of Spain, the Sephardim, are mocked by the authors. For example, you have here, so at the wedding of the Al-Khama, so the Al-Khama is the Jewish quarter, but it was also the name for the Muslim quarter. So at the wedding of the Al-Khama, nothing hairy was eaten, nor fish without scales, but as the bridegroom was able to, as soon as the bridegroom was able to, lots of eggplants and saffron with chard, and whoever said Jesus during the meal, let him eat no albondiguillas. Albondiguillas are meatballs. Okay, so here, and you have a lot of poems that really criticize the food practices of the Jews since the 15th century onwards. This is always the case, and this one is quite fun. But you have other literary works that really mock the Jews for their practices, because they were eggplant lovers, because they ate a lot of meatballs and Swiss chard and saffron and eggplant and all these things like this, and olive oil, and it's smelling so bad because they were using a lot of olive oil and garlic. Maybe I'm gonna end with this. So those are the books I wrote. So this is the Spanish edition, and I decided to show you this recipe called hojuelas or frajuelos or fijuelas. So this depends really of the people. So this recipe is mentioned in the Kitab al-Tabir, but also is mentioned in a lot of different kinds of sources that deal with the history of the Jews. And nowadays, this is a recipe that is still prepared by the Sephardic communities according to the place where they are living. Those are Inquisition trials. The Inquisition trials are, for me, the best way to understand the complexity and the food practices of the Jews at that time. Those date back to the 15th century, this one 17th century, but it's Mexico. But in fact, it's not important. In fact, if the process comes from Spain or from Portugal or from Italy or from Mexico, because the goal is always the same, to identify the crypto-Jewish families, so the families that were in fact converso families, so families that say, wow, now we're Christians, but officially this is what this, but unofficially they continue to practice Judaism at home. And so the Catholic monarchs created the Inquisition to be able to identify the families for their Jewish practices, and food is the evidence which is the more mentioned in the way to identify the families, the Sephardic families, for their practices. Those are still Inquisition trials. So in some of them, you have they refer to what should be and what is nowadays, and even nowadays in Sephardic cuisine, the more iconic dish mentioned already in Inquisition trials and in other kinds of sources, and it is called adafina. So adafina or dafina is still nowadays the iconic Shabbat dish for the Sephardic Jews from Spain. And it is mentioned in different sources. So, for example, in dictionary, you have in this one that dates back to Spain, 15th century. So 1484, this means only 3 years after the beginning of the Inquisition in Spain. And the word chamin here, chamin, it should be the equivalent of cholent, exactly. So chamin or trasnochado or ani or schina or adafina or dafina, in fact, they are all the same. And nowadays, it's still the Shabbat dish, iconic Shabbat dish. So those are recipes, huevos chaminados, so eggs that have been cooked for at least 6 hours, and they have this very special brown aspect. The yolk is super creamy, and it is mentioned in sources. For example, this one, 1490. And nowadays, it is still part of the Sephardic food practices. So, this is the murakaba. So, what is mentioned, a recipe that dates back to the 13th century Spain and is still prepared nowadays by the Moroccan Jews to celebrate the Mimuna, the end of Passover. It's delicious, I promise. This is sponge. So, the donut, which recipe dates back to the 13th century, kitab al-tabikh, which nowadays is consumed by all the Moroccans, Jews or Muslims, but the Jews eat sponge for Hanukkah, the feast of the lights that actually fall in December, and that's all. So I really hope it was just a short. Maybe a short presentation in order to highlight the complexity and the evolution of Sephardic food from the 13th century to maybe today. Thank you.
You want to have a seat?
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna start with some questions, if you don't mind, and then we're gonna open the floor to. Yeah. So let me begin. First of all, Helen, thank you so much for this really interesting talk, and I would like, before I give the floor to the audience to ask the questions, I want to go back to the document that you used in your research. I know that if you go back to the 9th century, 10th century, 11th century, before the Almoravids and Almohads in North Africa as well as Spain or the Iberian Peninsula, you go back to the Abbasid period and the Umayyad period, they were cookbooks with it's part of the whole Mediterranean tradition where people are writing books for mostly linking food to medicine. So do you think that this was probably in the mind of the author, the anonymous author of this book?
Oh yes, for sure, 100% sure, because you're right. So in fact, since the 12th century, we have dietary books that are just showing up. But nevertheless, exactly, so since the 10th century with the Kitab al-Tabikh, this is the same name, in fact, but it has been written under the Abbasids. So, the Abbasids are in the Middle East, so it's different. But nevertheless, they share exactly this same perception of food and medicine. But this is not surprising because the Arabs, in the whole term of what we understand by Arabs, they were very knowledgeable concerning the medicines from Hippocrates mainly and Galen, exactly also. And in the introduction of the cookbook, the Kitab al-Tabikh, you have a whole paragraph, or it's more than a paragraph, that deal with when the author says that he really believes in Hippocrates and Galen, and how food, in fact, food is your medicine. This is what Hippocrates says. So food is your medicine, and this cookbook, the Kitab al-Tahrir, reflects exactly the same way of thinking.
Thank you. So to follow on that, I want to go back to the document itself, to the book itself. This 13th century book is, I know probably we don't have the original. I know that there is a copy in Morocco, in the National Library in Morocco. I've seen actually the copy. It's beautiful. It's still, but it's not the original. It's a copy of a copy of a copy, probably.
Exactly.
So can you tell us about, to explain to the audience here, what is the form of this book? How does it, if you can describe it a little bit, and the part of the original one, in addition to, apart from the images you showed, if you can go and describe the book as a book, as a manuscript that we have today.
Manuscript, yes. So exactly. So we have nowadays a copy of this cookbook, but it's a copy, so it's a bit different. Nevertheless, so it allows us to understand maybe a bit better what is how the recipes are written in the original one. So this cookbook is very special because you have, at the very beginning, the cookbook does not start directly with the recipes. You have a lot of references concerning how you should, why you should eat this recipe and not this one, not the other one. For example, you have always at the very beginning of each recipe, you have a very short paragraph, or sometimes it's just one sentence that says, oh, if you are pregnant, you really don't want to make this recipe. Or if you are pregnant, you really want to make this recipe. Or if you have this kind of blood, so it's not good for you. So this is for the frame, the core of the cookbook. At the very, very beginning, the author talks about, write about the food practices in the Middle East. So you have a lot of references concerning what were the food in the courts of the very elite of the society in the Middle East, but also in under the Almohads Empire. So this included obviously Morocco. So this person knew very well what were the practices, even not only food practices, not only practices related with medicine, but also the practices of the courts, of the elite of the society. And there is this part in the introduction that highlight the relevance of believing in the Greek doctors. Because for the author, they were the more knowledgeable, and we really want to follow those steps. And at the end of the cookbook, you have all those recipes where you can in fact make perfumes. Because for the cookbook, in all the recipes of the cookbook, not only the last ones. It's always very important to prepare them very well. They have to be very beautiful, and there are also all those recommendations concerning the relevance of being in a good health and pure when you are making the recipes.
So how many copies do you think are in the world of this book?
I don't know. As I know, there is only this one in Rabat, so at the National Library of Rabat in Morocco. But mainly there are more. That's as far as I know, nobody found another one. But
to build on this, I want to go a little bit, still continue a conversation around the sources. Do you think that archaeological excavations, if there is such work now in the Iberian Peninsula, could give us another idea, or at least help us understand what you're trying to do by reading these early manuscripts of the 13th century and before?
Well, this would be very great. But I don't know how we could go. What kind of sources we could find, or maybe I was thinking about, because this is also mentioned in some of the sources I was able to read, that we're dealing with the jars that actually should have contained wine, But as in the 13th century, the dogmatic vision of the Almohads totally broke up all the jars that could have been used for having wine. So to be able not to, to invite the Muslims to consume wine. So I think that, yes, thanks to this, I was able to understand that it was very hard, it was in fact totally understandable that I was not able to find any pork or anything like this in the cookbook. But the question of wine is very special. Nevertheless, I know also that there were some treaty of Hizbah that say that thanks to this kind of source and the fatwa, we know that it was very, very hard for the Muslim rulers at that time to control the wine consumption of the Muslims, because it's really written in different kinds of sources.
So one of the things I really enjoyed about the book is how you jump from the text, the source itself, and then you go to oral history, and then you come to the present moment. So why did you choose, for instance, and then women are really central figures as far as the memory, and
yes.
Why do you choose, for instance, to take that route of thinking about the source instead of focusing, for instance, on oral history and women's, especially not only in the Iberian Peninsula and France and North Africa, as well as Latin America and the Americas in general?
Because it would have been another job. Oral history calls for using other kinds of sources that are sometimes not written sources, so it was just not my way of doing my research. Mm-hmm. So I was really focused on, on finding sources and written sources that were very clear and highlighting the practices. So, but I understand what you mean, and I think that obviously oral transmission is also very important, and we know that, for example, the songs are super important in the way of understanding the transmission, because this is also what happened after. Because obviously when you write something, so there is an evidence of what is happening. So this is also easier to trace back the heritage when you have a written source. But after 1492, because of the Inquisition, the oral transmission became even more relevant, because it was not good for the Sephardim to keep a written evidence of their practices. So, and there are songs, I know there are songs, it's just not my kind of source, but it could have been also interesting to do this.
I grew up in southern Morocco, and I grew up in many parts in Morocco, and I can tell you a lot of the foods that you showed here. I grew up basically eating that, being prepared for. And I came in here to the United States, especially to LA. I attended a lot of Shabbats where a lot of this food that I ate at home cooked by my mom, I eaten it cooked by a lot of Jewish mothers and friends that are very close to me. So is there something that beyond the Jewish dimension of what you describe, that is syncretic, that is Mediterranean, it allows us to highlight this in this environment where sometimes there are droughts, there is a shortage of food. Jews and Muslims are trying to figure out, of course, based on the religious restrictions, whether it's Islam or Judaism, they're trying to figure out a way how to adapt the eggplant to the dish, to adapt the poultry to the dish, how to adapt the meat to the dish, the vegetable, the chickpeas. Is that something that you think we can go beyond that to talk about Mediterranean dimension?
Well, I think we can talk about Mediterranean dimension. I think obviously, at least concerning Jewish practices, obviously we can, and in my point of view, we have to think about taking the adaptation as a way of
transmission, because if there was not this transmission, this adaptation, it would have been totally different.
Yeah.
Because of the context. It's always the same thing. This is because of the context. When people have to change the way of cooking, when people have to change the way of thinking, it's always because there is something that is happening. So I think, yes, that there is, and it was even more the case in the 13th century, Muslims and Jews were sharing very similar food practices. Obviously, so the fact that to salt the meat or to remove the tendon were very specific to the Jews. But obviously, if not that, if a Jew was going to the market to purchase many vegetables, the Muslim could have put the same products in the basket. But the difference is where the differences were they were in fact because there were differences because the Jews had to respect the laws of the kashrut.
Yeah.
So this makes the things different. And also the different was for the celebration of the Jewish holidays and the celebration of the Muslim holidays. Nevertheless, I was able to identify also, and this is also that we have to keep in mind, that there was this shared culinary heritage. And actually, the Berber from Morocco are sharing a lot of similar food practices with the Muslims. That's incredible. For example, the using the fish for the New Year, or the other, so because the Berber were not Muslim before the Muslim came, so they were the Berber of Morocco were they have a very special practices and very special food practices. So there is this shared culinary heritage, and but in order to celebrate their holidays, it's different.
Yeah. Yeah, before I give the question to the yeah, go ahead, sir. Yeah.
A few comments.
Do you need the
I think I can talk now.
Okay.
I wanted to say that you said every Jew actually salted the meat. Now the salting is a part of the kosher process.
Yeah.
Because the Bible says you should not eat upon the blood because it's the soul of the animal. So they always had to put in salt water for an hour to drain the blood out.
Exactly.
The other thing is honey. Basically, there was no beekeeping. There was mostly dates or sugared water with rose water. In their dishes. As you mentioned, honey. The main difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazi, I think, is the olive oil, the dates, and the spices.
There are others, yes, but they are among the, yeah.
And the other thing is, you did mention the grape leaves and burgle and so many of the other things, dates, of course, which is part of the tradition. The last thing is, King Solomon actually sent people to Tarsus in Spain to bring the gold from the Tarshish in Hebrew. And so many of the Jews stayed there, so we have Jews in Spain, a long time ago.
Yeah.
King Solomon. Oh, and one more thing, Mimuna, by the way, is not a Jewish holiday. It was taken from the Moroccan and Berber. They believed in a deity called Mimuna, which is the god of fortune. And so they used to make all this beautiful food and sweets for him. The Jews took it from them, just like they took the Hamsa from the Muslim in Egypt. So they borrowed a lot from Islam also.
Oh yeah. There is a shared culture between both cultures, Jewish and Muslim one, but the question of Mimuna is a bit complex. So there are a lot of different interpretations concerning why the word Mimuna. For example, some people say that it's in relation with Maimonides, so the Rambam. There are also other references that say that Mimun is for joy and celebration, happy celebration. There are different things. It's just that Mimuna is actually, I'm a medievalist, so my area of study is not nowadays, absolutely not. But it's just that nowadays the feast called Mimuna is just the word which is used to celebrate the end of Passover. I'm not focused on the meaning of the word Mimuna. I'm just focused on the way of...
So I can tell you, because I did research it, that Mimuna has nothing to do with Maimonides.
No. Yes, I don't think so. Exactly.
It was actually a deity that the Berber believed in, and he was the god of fortune and good luck.
Yeah.
He used to make all this food for him, and then the Jews took it from there.
Yeah.
Yes?
You did not mention the crown of the Moroccan cuisine, the pastilla. Did you mention in your books?
No, it's not. This is a regular question I have. Yes. No, it's not mentioned. Nevertheless, I don't want to make bridge between something that maybe are not related. But when you see the stuffed bread Jewish dish called the stuffed bread Jewish dish, that it really looks like a pastilla. But honestly, I don't think there is any relation with this. But to answer your question, it's not mentioned. Couscous is mentioned, but not pastilla.
Yes?
Yeah, thank you. This was super interesting. I'm curious to hear more about your experience translating this work into like contemporary cookbook. When you were flipping through the slides with the recipes, I noticed that one said, today people might make this with potatoes, but as that's a new world food, they wouldn't have been doing that at that point. So I imagine like the process obviously of cooking looked a lot different back then than it does now. And obviously the ingredients that people have access to is a lot more global today than it was then. And like technologically, it's very different, the mechanics of cooking and the conventions are very different in terms of how people are familiar with like what a recipe looks like. So I'm curious sort of your process of kind of all those permutations, translating something that is still has continuity but is more familiar or comfortable for contemporary cooks to work with. It seems like a tough challenge.
Yeah, this is a good question of that because you're totally right. This has been a lot of time. It was very challenging because when you read the recipe in Arabic, it's it's quite easy. The problem is not the understanding of the recipe. It's like the problem was, the issue was to be able to recreate as soon as I was able to what was written in the recipe in Arabic. So you're right. So some of the herbs, mainly the issue was the herbs sometimes. So because the herbs that were used at that time, sometimes it's not that they are not, it's just very hard, in fact, to find them nowadays. Yeah. But on the other side, almost all the ingredients are still used today. So it's not the herb was the main issue. The other issue was that for me, there was a lack of steps in the recipe. We were jumping from one part to another part, and there was something is missing here. So this was another challenge. So to understand what was the part that was missing, and the other challenge, two other main challenges were first the lack of amount of the ingredients. So sometimes it asks for you have to use the shell of the egg, so like twice. Okay, that was in the better of the case, it was mentioned. But sometimes it's just you pour oil, a bit of oil. So it's like my grandma would say, you have to add a bit of something. But a bit is totally different according to each other. So this was very hard because I had to try to make the recipes several times to be able to understand what a bit was referring to. And the last thing was the time for cooking, because it was almost never mentioned. So it's just have to cook it, but we do not know if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour. So there is nothing. Nevertheless, the only time when I was able to, so the time, the duration for the cooking was mentioned. It was because when the recipe was asking for cooking the dish by night and wait until the day after. So, so everybody knows what this means. So, and this is the only reference to time and duration, because if not, it's very hard. It's very hard. But I like cooking, so.
Yes.
I'm struck because yesterday's New York Times had a major article on poverty, extreme poverty in America, and health.
Yes.
And food, the foods being consumed by the poorest rural people in America. And they're totally eating processed foods, not understanding how it affects their health. And I'm interested that you say many of the recipes refer to how eating this food will affect your health.
Yeah.
And thinking how far backwards we've gone by people having no sense of food and health and connecting the two in America today. It's very profound to hear you talk about that from that period of time and now today.
Yeah.
And the percentage of Americans that this affects, not understanding that food is health.
Is your medicine. If
Yes.
you want to be in a good health, you have to eat good. If you are sick, you have to use food as a medicine.
Exactly.
And you're totally right. I totally agree. This is something that nowadays American people, American citizens, American people, I think it is also the case for other people. I mean, so we have some have lost the importance, the relevance of eating good to be in a good health. One of the writings I really, really love, and it is still one of my source, and is The Regimen of Health, written by Maimonides in at the very, very end of the 12th century, so 1198. Yeah. I really invite you. They are short. It's not very long, so you can read it really easily. It has been translated in English and other languages, and it's called The Regimen of Health. And Maimonides, Rambam, who was a doctor, so really highlights and underscores the relevance of using food and eating well, not a lot, but healthy food to be and keep in a good health. This is something that is like logical, but I promise that one should read this again today to understand the situation. But this book, The Regimen of Health by Maimonides, has been written at the end of his life when he was in Egypt. Yeah. And this book has been written because the son of, I think it's Saladin, that he was very, very sick, but with mental issues. And so he asked Rambam to write a book for him, for his son. And it is interesting because these books has several chapters, maybe, I think it's 9 chapters, but I'm not sure. But what I'm sure, it's the 5 first chapters have nothing to do with the problem, the issue, the mental issue that his son has. It's just the basic element to be and keep in a good health. But you have everything, how you have to work out, how to have to take bath, how you have to eat, when, how. That's crazy. He said, yes, the best bread is the salted bread, which is cooked in the tanur, so in the oven, the very special oven. You really don't want to eat this, you really want to eat this, and not at that time if he also talks about sex and food. So maybe another interesting.
Yes?
I guess just to comment on that, I'm not sure that's quite a fair framing of the situation. I don't think like the rural poor eat processed food because they don't know it's bad for them, but rather because eating healthy is far more expensive in this country than eating poorly is. Mm-hmm. So and also because if you work multiple jobs and don't have time for food preparation, and your jobs are involve you sitting a lot, it's just I guess I quibble with the idea that it's a lack of knowledge around these issues, and more that modern life and contemporary American society are not set up for people in desperate financial situations to really care for their body in that way. But I also had, this is probably a really stupid question. I was wondering if you know La Cocinera de Castamar.
Cocinera de Castamar?
Yeah, the book / it's now a TV show.
What? No. What is this?
It was a novel. It's now a TV show about a woman.
Oh yes, I know what it is.
With Michelle Jenner.
Yeah. I think I know what you mean.
Have you seen it?
No, I just watched the first part. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So what's your question about that?
My question was, so I find it very interesting. Some of the stuff you mentioned comes up a lot in the food preparation on the show. Especially the use of entrails as stuffing is very common, and eggs.
I did not see that part.
As well as olive oil. So I guess I was wondering, I mean, if there's any accuracy there, but also, since it takes place in the 18th century, if there's a way of looking into it and finding continuities between the period you're talking about and like modern cookery in Spain.
Well, I think it's very first of all, concerning what is just showing up in the TV shows. Sometimes, and it happened to me with CNN just last week. Sometimes when they want to just to do something and to create a series or something, they ask us a lot of questions concerning food practices. So maybe they did not ask me for this, but maybe they asked to someone else. So and then the other part of the question was dealing with.
Well, I was wondering. She also writes a cookbook at the end. Sorry, spoilers. I was wondering if we can see these kinds of things, since it takes place in the 18th century, as like a midway point to help understand some continuities between the medieval period and modern Spanish.
Well, it's hard because the 18th century, first, it's not my field of research. 18th century, it's, very... I'm the earlier period, but it's right to think that when you read a book, so there is this desire to continuity and to transmission. So maybe maybe it could be interesting to go deeper in this. But the 18th century is very, very light for me. But it's interesting.
So you have a question?
Yeah, just one comment. Maimonides, who lived between 1134 and 1204, wrote the book around 1200 roughly.
Which one?
I'm sorry? The book about health.
The regimen of health.
For the Sultan of Egypt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So his main thing was that do not overeat. Always eat and feel hungry. Number two, don't eat cold things. No cold water because that's going to ruin you.
Yeah.
Those were the two principles in his book. The other thing is about timing. There's no need for timing in those things because you actually taste the food as you go along.
Yeah.
You know exactly when it's ready.
Yes. Maimonides has a lot of principles which are very interesting, and just when you read the Regimen of Health, you also and the other books, because he wrote a lot of books that are dealing with food practices and sometimes recipes. You have also recipes. For example, in my cookbook, the last one, there is a recipe for matzah, because then he teaches us how to make matzah and when, and also in the commentary of the Mishnah and in the Mishneh Torah, there are a lot of interesting information concerning the way to celebrate Passover and to make food for Passover, and very focused on matzah, so unleavened bread.
So I want to go back to the document again, because the historian in me is trying to get back. So
you like the documents, right?
So it's a beautiful document. I think it's really, all the recipes are really amazing. But one of the things do you think that those recipes were written by the anonymous author they were compiled from different families? How do you, is there an idea about how these recipes were compiled?
I do not have idea about this, but what I can tell you is that they have been written from one purpose. I don't think they have been compiled, but I think it's maybe one anonymous author. I don't think there are diverse ones, different ones. But sometime I was not sure about this because the writing is a bit different, but it was a copyist, so it's different copyist, but I think there was only one author.
Okay. And then, so what made you, in this book, in the chapter 11, why did you decide to include some of the recipes of course it's a historical account, but then what's the reason why you chose to include some recipes with images here and in this?
There are those ones, right?
No, in this book, yeah.
Yes, but the photos that are in the 9th chapter are photos about what?
No, in the 11th chapter, yeah. So you have the...
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes,
yeah.
Because I think that it's also important to make a bridge between the theory and the practice. Okay. I think it's important that, and maybe it's a new way of thinking, I don't know, but I think it's important for people who are reading a book of history which is also dealing with food and food practices, then also can have this, visual result about something that deal with food. It's like it's not absolutely not the case, but it's like just purchasing a cookbook with no photos. Yeah. Well, I think that it was relevant to add photos of those recipes because people can just see how it looks like. And also, someone asked me, I don't know, it may be 2 years ago, someone told me, well, I did not know that, reading this book, well, I did not know that this recipe was bearing this name because I know exactly this recipe, but for me, it bears totally different name. This is because the Sephardic diaspora is very, very huge. So Jews from Argentina and Jews from Chile and Jews from Italy are, have special food practices. So there is sometimes one dish and different names, or there are sometimes different names in one dish. Or that's why it's important. People just can't see what is the result.
So I want to ask you one last question, but it's a question that I would ask my wife, who is a linguist. When somebody speaks, she would definitely listen to the person and then tell, well, this person has lived in this area for a while, so there are traces of the place of origin.
Exactly.
Would you, as a chef and also as a historian of culinary Sephardic traditions, would you tell where the person is from, whether they are in Argentina or Venezuela or Brazil, from depending what food they eat? You eat in their homes, or what they cook?
What is interesting is that I also like...
The reason why I'm saying this, because
yes.
I need to give a context for this.
Yes.
If you look at, there are probably before Facebook, in this city, in LA, one of the first the websites about the different North African Jewish communities were established by a Tunisian Jew, and then there is a website called Zlabia, which is in Algeria, Harissa in Tunisia, and Dafina in Morocco. And there is in the imaginary, in the way we think about place and food, we already placed Dafina in Morocco, Harissa in Tunisia, and Zlabia in Algeria. So would you say that if you enter a place, you could tell where at least some elements can tell you, once you taste their food, despite the fact that it's shared, there are some elements that trace where this person is from?
Sometimes this happens, and that's right. Sometimes it's happened, or sometimes the dish is almost the same. For example, if you ask a Jewish Tunisian, a Jewish Moroccan, a Jewish Algerian, do the same dish? Sometimes the dish looks really, they're looking very similar, but there is one ingredient that makes the dish different, and so you know that this dish is from Jewish Tunisian and not Jewish Moroccan. So yes, I agree with this. Yes, and it's quite funny as well.
Any other questions? I think we have.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.